Hello, 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 everybody. Today, I just want to talk about how really being open to express everything that we're feeling in every moment of time is the key to being able to move forward through any kind of experience. And so the reason why I talk about this is because I don't know, I think about it a lot. I really ask myself like how did I get to this point now, after everything I've experienced? Because I remember that there was a point in time. So for example, I think the biggest the biggest thing that I was able to overcome was realizing that my mother is a narcissist. And I don't use this term lightly, and I know that there are a lot of people and situations which throw this term around. I'm referring to narcissistic personality disorder, which is a psychological disorder. It's not an adjective to describe someone who's in a bad mood. So I'm really talking about someone who just genuinely does not have good intentions towards other people and tends to see other people as a commodity. And I feel like even if you haven't had a relationship with a narcissist personally, we all have a relationship with narcissistic forms of business, of societal programming and behavior, which also leaves us feeling a kind of trauma, So, for example, if you've grown up in many parts of Europe or the United States and you went to an ordinary public school, it's very likely that you have grown up within the bell structure. So every 1 hour, the bell rings. Where did that come from? This came from factories. So I mention this because this kind of way to program our behavior and to program our way of thinking is very much based on what I perceive to be a narcissistic viewpoint of how human society should operate, So I really feel like the reason why many structures have these very oppressive elements is because they come from people who wanted to oppress people. So, for example, Rockefeller has a quote, "I don't want a nation of thinkers. I want a nation of workers." Dun, dun, dun. So, I make light of this because knowledge is power, and when we know these things, we can start to see them for what they truly are, We can start to analyze the experiences that we've had in our lives and see, these lingering traits of narcissism. And so for me, working with this thing with narcissism has been really a big question of, I have so many bottled up feelings. What do I do with them? And I feel like growing up in a very overly systematized way of thinking and living also creates that question of like, where is the space for me to really express myself and just let it all loose, And when I observe kind of, people from older generations or from certain, I guess, groups within society, I see this rigidity, this very formal behavior, which is sometimes really dehumanizing. It's overly formal and it's more of an acting than it is actually real, It's one thing to show respect. It's another thing to act like a robot. And so for me, unlocking expression is really unlocking the door to find ourselves again. After living in a world that oftentimes really wants to disconnect us from ourselves and really plug us into everything that's external. So you watch the TV and you listen to the music and you listen to what people say about how you should be and how you should act and what you should think and what you should feel and how you should live. And eventually, it doesn't really become about you at all. It becomes about what everyone else thinks. And so I feel like when we really connect with our capacity to express ourselves, we connect with the fact that we are beings of nature. And when I look at all the plants and all the animals, I observe animals a lot, for example, and I watch them and I don't ever see doubt in their movements. There's always this kind of self-assured feeling that I get from them. I observe my cat more than anything. I observe this energy of like, I don't care. I'm going to kill that bird. I'm going for it, I need to eat something. Does she do it in excess? Does she sell birds that she's killed to other cats? No. She does it for what she needs. And she shares it as well. She brings it to me. She brings it to other cats. But she doesn't capitalize off of it. She does it because it's her instinct. And so this element of instinct is something that I feel is very is the base of our capacity to express ourselves. It's our gut feeling, but it's also the ancestral wisdom that we carry within our bodies. So our bodies tell us when something is wrong. Our bodies tell us when it's time to walk away from something. When something just doesn't sit right, or when we get ill, or when we're having kind of symptoms of something, our body's always speaking to us and always is showing us a way for us to cleanse ourselves of whatever is happening. And so expressing ourselves isn't just about feeling, it's also about really listening to the body and being like, okay, I have this symptom. I feel weird. When I think about this thing, does that make the symptom worse or does it make it better? So for example, if you're thinking about wanting to sustain yourself financially from your passion, and so you want to exit the structures that have been forced upon you in a way, when you think about those structures, and let's say that you have a weird feeling in your stomach. So you have this weird feeling in your stomach, and then you think about really pursuing your passion. Does that make your symptom worse or better? Do you feel lighter or do you feel heavier? And then when you think about all these structures and all these things that you've kind of been indoctrinated into, how does your body feel? Does your symptom worsen or does it become better? And so I feel like these kinds of communications and asking ourselves these questions are things that are very animal. It's really connecting with the part of us that's very instant. I feel like the body is a very instant source of communication. It's like you walk into a room and you're like, oh, I feel weird. I want to throw up. Like our body tells us instantly, and then the emotional aspect, of course, and like the thought aspect. But I feel like the first part of expression is connecting with our instincts. And it's really beautiful to me because when I was 12 or 13, I had to do the first research project I had ever done in my life. And so I always had this really strong connection with painting. But the way that school taught art made me really afraid of that and made me feel isolated from it and made me feel like art was this weird scientific process. And school also made me feel that way about language, and that's something that I'd like to talk about more deeply at another time. But anyways, I never lost the connection with painting that I had always felt. So when I was 13 and they gave me this project, everyone was a little bit nervous because it was the first time that you had to do a really in-depth research project. And it was so instant for me, like, yeah, I wanna learn about the history of painting. And so something that made me really happy was to learn about how painting was the first form of written communication. We used to stick our hands in red color, and put it onto the rocks, or we used to paint animals, or we used to paint other tribes. And, there are many different interpretations of what these paintings could mean. But my perspective on it is that artistic expression is a very basic form of communication, and it's instinctual. So when I look at children and they're coloring and they're scribbling whatever thing, or they're drawing people that they know, or they're drawing their dog, or they're drawing the tree or the bird, it's their way of making sense of the world around them. It's not about how beautiful it looks. I think that art and beauty definitely have some kind of relationship. But I also think that there's a side of art that really has nothing to do with beauty and has everything to do with just expressing. And I feel like a lot of us hold ourselves back from artistic expression because there's this oversaturation of the idea that art is beautiful, always. But why does it need to be beautiful always? My emotions don't need to be beautiful always. I can be messy, I can be sad, I can be upset. It's not about being cheerful or happy all the time, or this fake like, hi, how are you? I'm good, how are you? Oh, well, I'm just doing just dandy, Like, I always felt so uncomfortable with this growing up in the US. And I'm so fortunate for my great-grandfather because I grew up so much with him. I spent loads and loads of time with him when I was a child for various reasons. And he grew up with his grandmother who immigrated from Sweden. And she spoke Swedish, and she had this culture very strongly within her. And she shared that with him, and he shared it with me. And so for me, it was really strange when I was a kid, like the small talk thing. I didn't get it. I was like, I don't know, why are people asking me, hi, how are you? And they walk away. I always used to say, I'm doing really well. I would start to, like get into a conversation and they would just walk away. And I remember asking my grandfather, like, why do they do that? He didn't really have an answer for me because I was really young, But in my family, we never had small talk. It was really, we spoke with each other when we had a reason to speak, and we enjoyed the silence as well, and that's something that I really appreciate. And silence is also an expression. And so that's another thing that I feel like society often puts onto us, of like this pressure to speak about nothing. Oh yeah, like, did you hear about this thing, or the weather, or it's infinite, and it's just a waste of energy. And I feel like we've been taught so many things that drain our energy rather than the things that make our energy grow and expand and uplift ourselves and uplift everyone around us. And I feel like that comes from true expression, so it's one thing to feel our emotions and find healthy ways to express them. And it's a totally different thing to feel our emotions and have absolutely no sense of control and take that out on the people that we love the most. And so I really want to make that distinction clear. We can feel everything, but we don't have the right to take those feelings out on anybody. We don't have the right to blame anybody for anything. What the world hasn't taught us is how to feel and how to make our feelings enhance our lives. How to really use all of this emotional energy in a way that's productive and supportive for ourselves and for the people around us. And so, for example, a feeling that's oftentimes really judged and criticized is the emotion of anger. No, you should never be angry. You should be like the Buddha. You should be like this. You should be like that. But if you look at the scale of different emotional vibrations, anger is above powerlessness. And so if you've been traumatized and you've been abused, and I imagine if you've been in those situations, you've also been told that you don't have the right to feel angry, or you have felt like you always need to people please or show like this nice side of yourself. But anger is a fire. And it's a fire that can push us into higher frequencies. And so anger is just the beginning of getting to higher emotional states like peace, joy, freedom. But if you've been severely abused, or if you've been abused at all, anger is your key to liberation in a lot of ways. It's not the only key, but it's an amazing tool. And this manipulation that exists not only within people who are abusers, but within society at large, about how anger is like this nasty emotion and you shouldn't have it and you should be pure and strip yourself of anger or whatever. I don't know. There's a lot of different rhetoric about this. If we can really become alchemists, and when I say alchemy, I mean to take something in one of its forms and turn it into something that you really need. So, for example, you can take this raw emotion of anger and you can alchemize it, or you can change it. You can turn it into a force of transformation. You can turn it into the thing that inspires you to really change. To say, hey, that was a huge injustice. I'm not going to accept that. And for me, I had this massive wound with people pleasing. And so I just think about like, uh, you know, when I was really in this people pleasing way of life, because I wasn't always in that way of existing. Actually, what happened is, I moved in with my mom, my biological mom, when I was 7 years old. I say she's my biological mom because I consider my grandmother to be my mom in my heart. And she feels the same way, and so it's beautiful. And I'm so grateful that the first 7 years of my life were such a great base for me to be able to handle living with someone who is so abusive and narcissistic. And so when I moved with her, I lost my train of thought a little bit. Yeah. Okay, so when I moved with her, I knew what love was. I had love all around me. I was very loved by my family. Were they perfect? No. Were we the American cookie cutter suburban family? No, not at all. But there was a lot of love. And that was a really powerful gift that my grandmother and my great grandfather always imparted upon me. So when I went to live with my mom, she was so incredibly abusive that I remember I would feel very angry. I would feel incredibly angry. I was a very young child. I was like, what is this? This is outrageous, This goes against everything that the world has taught me so far about how life and love is. And I wanted to change. I wanted to leave. I wanted to find some sort of legal process to become independent from her. I was desperate. I wanted to run away. I wanted to do anything possible to get away. So anger was present with me when I thought about my mom for many, many years of living with her. So I lived with her for 9 years in total. When I was 16, I went to a psychologist for the first time, and she just made it clear, she was just like, yeah, you gotta go. You gotta try to figure out something with her, try to make some sort of relationship with her. And so once I had this emotional awakening when I was 16, when I really stopped feeling numb after 9 years of severe abuse, when I started feeling again and I cried and I let everything out, I called my mom and I said, hey, I want to talk to you. I want to make our relationship work. And I took it from really the most objective perspective that I could, of like, I just want a relationship with her. And I know that she's not really capable of giving me what I need. And that was a really hard thing to swallow. But I had this hope inside because I was a 16-year-old girl. And so I was like, well, maybe she can change and maybe it's possible. And maybe we can go to counseling together or. And so I think that once I started getting in tune with my feelings, that's when I got into this more people-pleasing way of existing. Because then I was just sort of like only focused on her and only focused on how could I make this relationship work. And I kind of took it personally, of like, well, maybe it doesn't work because I'm not this, or, I can't surrender my ego enough, or like whatever bullshit exists in the quote unquote spiritual community. There is a lot of good stuff there, but there's a lot of stuff that's not spiritual at all, and that's like literally pure manipulation and is an expression of narcissism. And that's another thing I needed to realize. And so I'm so grateful because I was able to have these realizations. I took my time and I had experiences and, I opened myself to live the processes that life was offering to me. But I always had this root of expression, so once I started seeing a psychologist, I opened myself to start painting. And once I started painting, I couldn't get enough of it. And I was like, yeah, this is what it was supposed to be. This is what I've always wanted, you know? And so painting became this place where I could see all the different sides of myself, where I could see my anger. I remember one time I was so angry that I painted only with red, and I was like throwing paint at the canvas, and I set parts of the canvas on fire because I was super upset. I was so mad. And afterwards, I felt fine. I was like all good, you know, because I didn't suppress it. And I had a healthy way to express that anger and to channel that anger into some sort of change, you know, into some sort of transformation. And so I'm sharing this podcast. I know it's kind of really disorganized, and that's really kind of how my mind works. I just kind of flow with what's coming up, and I build off of that. But yeah, for me, expression is the key to never being oppressed by anybody. Because if I'm really clear about how I feel, no one can ever take advantage of me. Like if I'm talking like really clear about how I feel, and I don't doubt myself and I don't undervalue my feelings, you know, so I'm not using emotion as a reactionary thing, but rather I'm using emotion as something that is proactive. So, for example, so several years later, I got into some kind of dynamic with someone who was extremely narcissistic and who led to me discovering what narcissism was, because before that, I didn't even know what it was. I just thought that my mom was incredibly wounded and that I needed to find a way to have any kind of relationship with her, and that if I couldn't do that, there was something wrong with me. So that was no fun. Not at all. It wasn't a very fun time. And so when I was in this dynamic with this person, you know, I started talking with other people who were also connected with this person. And we started to be like, you know what? This person has said the same thing to me, has done the same thing to me. We had seen violent behaviors. And so it was kind of like, well, what is this? And then I don't even remember how I discovered that this was narcissism. I really don't remember at all. But then we kind of like all got together and started reading a book about what narcissism was and talking about our experiences with this person. And then it just led to this huge opening of like, oh, wow, this is who my mom is. And that was a huge pill to swallow for me. Because then I went through this process of questioning my existence of like, well, maybe I'm just a narcissist, or, you know, maybe I'm just a sociopath, or maybe I'm just insane, or like all of these different things. And fortunately, I was living with my best friend and her mom. And so we had this joke, like there was an extra room. And my friend was like, you were dead in that room for a week. Because it was pure winter. We were in Estonia, and it was, you know, 4 hours of daylight. That's not even daylight because the sun doesn't even pass the horizon. And so it was the perfect time, honestly, to really be in that energy. And I remember just being in there for a week, like just questioning my reality and learning about narcissism and, you know, asking myself and doubting myself and wondering if, you know, it was the right decision to cut these kinds of people out of my life completely and make sure that they have no way to contact me. That was a really huge step in the process. And so the underpinning of all of this was the fact that I was expressing myself. Because when someone rips away your capacity to express yourself, or, you know, they program you to think that it's wrong to express yourself, it's like cutting the leaves of the plants. Yeah, there's a stalk there and there's the capacity to grow leaves, but we don't want them to grow leaves because once they grow leaves, they can interfere with what we want. It's something like this because our capacity to feel is massive, and it's what makes life really fulfilling. This quote unquote modern way of living, which is very material and logic based, has its benefits to a certain extent, but when it's not balanced out with a spirit and a heart and emotionality, I don't even know if emotionality is a word, but I feel it, the capacity to emote, then it becomes so dull and people become really isolated from each other. We see suicide, we see violence, we see all kinds of different expressions of things that go against this whole logical rhetoric, because we're not robots. Of course, we have a logical side and we should develop both in harmony and in union, you know. And one should never overpower the other. They should be working together. And I feel like that's the balance that we need to find within ourselves and that we need to create in the world. And so coming from a society that's very hyper logic based, um, and on top of that, being abused by someone who every time this person did something to me, they would deny the fact that that happened. Or if I would cry and feel hurt by it, I'm the problem and I'm the XXXXX word. Things that a child shouldn't even be hearing. Really, it made me question my whole existence. And I'm really grateful to be in the process now of feeling like I'm building my presence in the world, and I'm not afraid of those things that I used to be afraid of. And of course, I still doubt myself sometimes, and I still have these moments where this thing that was programmed into me was like this really deep criticism, comes up. But every time it comes up less because I see it and I'm like, yeah, okay. It's just like, yeah. It's like sometimes that criticism that comes up is helpful. But the negativity towards myself or the self-doubt or like the loops of like, whoo, do I really deserve to exist? Was a really big thing that was coming up for me for a long time. Because when you are abused, oftentimes the first thing that an abuser wants to make you feel is that your existence depends on them. And that you don't have the right to exist if you're not in service to them. Or if you're not, it's not even really in service to them, it's like full obedience to them. And my mom really never was able to do that with me. Like I never really got to the point where I felt fully under her because, as I said, the first 7 years of my life, I was living with people who were just genuine people, like they weren't perfect, but they loved me and I knew that and I never questioned it. So when you're constantly in question of like, this person says that they love me, but they just threw a bottle at my head and swore at me and then said that that didn't even happen and that I'm crazy, really is like such a huge like mind fuck of like what? Totally made me question my capacity to perceive reality. And, it still comes up in moments, but I think that as I have been working with this for many years within myself, and I've found people who are also working with this within themselves, what I've realized is just if we can express, we can liberate. If we can express, we can liberate. When we express, we liberate. When we express, we grow. We take so many weights off of ourselves. We don't carry this kind of stuff with us anymore because it was never ours to begin with. And so, yeah, this is really why I talk a lot about expression. And colors have helped me a lot to tap in with that expression, because I had this weird thing with the color black. Had a really weird thing with it. I didn't like it. I didn't want to wear black. I didn't want people to perceive me as like dark, and I had this, and that was really my people pleasing phase. I was really afraid of people seeing that, I also have a character. I'm not just like this whatever angelic presence that I was kind of taught to be. I have an opinion and I have a voice, and I can say things that are controversial. That was a huge thing for me. And unfortunately, when I was in high school, I signed up for a debate club. I actually signed up for like every club that I could, just to spend less time around my mom. And so fortunately, being with debate really helped me to develop my voice. But then when I really got into the trauma of everything, like at some point it just kind of hit me, like something opened up within me and I realized everything that I had lived. And I was just questioning my whole existence, and I got really into the self-doubt and all the different emotions that were coming up at that time. I felt like I had no voice, and I felt like I never wanted to be controversial, and I always wanted to be like this really lighthearted presence. But as I've connected with Black, I've been able to protect myself. I've been able to feel this kind of comfort of the darkness, of like the darkness of the night, that I love. I love being awake at night, and I love kind of like this warm feeling that it gives me. And I love the sun as well. I love the daytime. And I love both, and black and white actually, like if you look into color psychology, are the most basic colors that we have perceived. And they're not actually considered to be colors scientifically, but our brains perceive them as colors. And so if you look into every human language that has existed, black and white always has a word. Not always the other colors like red and blue and yellow and green, but black and white always have a color. It's a very universal kind of polarizing thing. And this information comes from a book called How Colors Affect You. I will leave a link in the description of this podcast if you're interested. It's a really wonderful audiobook that has a lot of lectures about the psychology of color. And so, yeah, I remember just feeling like, I had this weird thing with black, And so when I started kind of taking a break from painting, because I felt like I needed to I had this goal, I was like, I want to feel this freedom of expression in my body, in my voice, in the way that I speak, in my eyes, in my hands, in my arms, in my legs, my feet. I want to feel this freedom of expression that I feel in painting within every aspect of my life, not just when I paint. Because then I became very like, I need to paint, and I wasn't able to express myself in other aspects. And so when I took a break from painting, I started just realizing that I had this really strong connection with colors, and that I actually think in color. And that's why when I was a kid, it was really hard for me to speak with words sometimes, because I remember I would see so many colors or so many different, like color, like forms of colors. I don't really know how to describe this. And I reconnected with this when I traveled for the first time and I didn't bring my painting stuff with me. And I was so angry at myself at the moment. But then I remember I was walking with my uncle, who I was meeting basically for the first time. And I just remember that a painting flashed in my mind. And I was like, that's how I feel. And I realized, like, wow, actually, I think in color. It's not just I paint in color, I think in it, I feel in color. And that's kind of when I started to develop this more personal connection with colors. And so when I went more deeply into that, I realized that I had this really strong resistance to black. I never painted with black. I never really wore black. I was really like in this whole thing of like, I need to be perceived a certain way. Otherwise, I'm not worthy. I can't be controversial. Otherwise, I'm not worthy. I need to make people feel good. Like the value of my existence lies within my capacity to make other people feel good. This was a really underlying belief that drove a lot of the ways that I acted in the world unconsciously. And I allowed people to take advantage of me. Like black to me is very much this energy of the night, this energy of the mysterious, of the unknown, of this sort of like coziness of winter. To me, this is how I perceive it. Black belt, like you've made it, like you've made it to the top level of being able to not only protect yourself, but to be a martial artist. There are a lot of different connotations with every color. And it's really interesting because as I'm talking about black, there's this huge black insect just walking around on the floor. And it's like this really shiny black, really intense black. I don't know, just beautiful expressions. And so, yeah, like as I was able to, even though I was going through all these different things and internal crises, the thing that always brought me back to life was expressing myself. Not only through words, so the origin of art therapy, which is also talked about in this book, How Colors Affect You, it's very briefly touched upon. They talk about how children were traumatized in a hurricane, after a hurricane occurred where they lived. And oftentimes, it's a lot easier for us to express things without using words. And so that's kind of what art therapy is about, is to go beyond words. And sometimes we don't even feel like we can express those things in words. And especially when we're children, it's even harder. And so, yeah, they did this experiment with children and they realized that at the beginning of this process of art therapy, the children only drew and painted with black and white. But as time went on and as they kept expressing, they started bringing colors in again. And so I feel like there's this really subtle connection with color within any form of expression, really. I'm not just talking about art. It's in the clothes that we wear. It's in the food that we eat. It's in the environments that we surround ourselves in. Color is everywhere and it's constantly speaking to us, and it's a very natural and fundamental language of expression. I feel blue with sadness. I'm green with envy, like there's a lot of these different things. Red, danger. Yellow, caution. There's a lot of these different kind of archetypes and ways that colors have been used in the world around us. Green, go, White, purity. And there's also a lot of different kind of programmed associations that we have with color that affect our expression. And so what really liberated things for me was to just play with color like a child. Like, I don't know anything. I don't have any concepts. And I realized that I had a lot of concepts built up against the color black, for example. Like, um, you know, the US has this kind of like religious fundamentalist backbone. And so kind of I feel like religion really made it like white is this godly color and black is like hell, you know? And it's been scientifically proven that black and white as colors polarize our brains. And so if you make a political poster, for example, and one person's wearing white and another person's wearing black, the person who's wearing white, people normally feel like, yeah, like that's the person, you know, that person's a good person. The other person's a bad person. And so there are a lot of these different connotations. And I'm taking this from the book How Colors Affect You. These studies are really wonderful. I really recommend listening to it. It's not very long and it's very to the point and in depth. Wonderful. Really, really wonderful. And so moving beyond those reactions, you know, not only just like the emotional thing of like, oh, I'm afraid of appearing a certain way, or I'm afraid of like the quote unquote darker side of life. It's also seeing how society affects the way that we express and how society programs our feelings around certain colors. And that's something that I will develop on more in this podcast and, you know, and everything that I shared on conditional colors. But the point that I really want to put across is that expression is the most basic, is one of the most basic things that we can do as humans, as animals, as beings on this planet. Every creature expresses itself. And so these ways that we've learned to express ourselves, you know, like anger's bad, sadness is bad, you should be happy. If you're going to go outside, you should be happy, you know. But you shouldn't be too happy because then you're going to threaten people and make them feel insecure. So you should be like this weird neutrality, cheerful robot. You shouldn't really express like the full range of emotions. You know, a lot of these different things have kind of been underlying in our education and like different societal structures. And, you know, I'm really just speaking from experience of growing up in the US. I've lived in other countries as well, and I'm currently living in another country. But I can't speak for how it is to grow up in other countries because I only grew up in the US. So if you have any comments about how you grew up in your country and how maybe certain emotions were celebrated and certain emotions weren't, or how the use of different colors were in your country, I would be super interested in that information. So anytime, please feel free to send an email to unconditionalcolors@gmail.com. But I really just want to wrap this up by saying, no matter what you go through, no matter what anybody says to you, your capacity to express yourself is uniquely yours. And the more that you allow yourself to feel everything that you truly feel and express that in healthy ways, the more that you'll find a freedom that you can't buy. This is a freedom that is innately yours and that children express in a very beautiful way, and that all of us are entitled to. All of us are entitled to express ourselves purely. And when we can connect purity with rationality on a certain level, like the purity of expression, but also, you know, being able to modulate how we express to certain people or how we express in certain situations, we are able to really master our emotions and master our expression and to bring our feelings as a gift to the world, you know? So instead of being angry and acting in outrage and insulting people, we can take that anger and we can bring an energy of transformation to the world. Of course, we can bring a fiery passion behind it as well, and that's also really enlivening, you know? We can channel that anger into, you know, building the energy, building the fire, building the passion, rather than creating more separation and more pain. And I feel like that's the magic of painting for me, you know, is like you take all the different colors and you realize that all the different colors can contrast each other and make each other more beautiful. And the contrast is really what takes the difference between throwing colors at something and really making a work of art. You know, it's like finding an artful way to express the contrast that exists within us and the contrast of life. And so, no matter what troubles you, no matter what you face, if you have a healthy way to express it and to find the purity of your emotions and to find ways for those emotions to help you to grow and help the world around you to grow, nothing will ever be able to overpower you. Your power to express is your power to liberate yourself and to liberate the world. Thank you so much for joining me here, for listening to this podcast. And I hope that you have a really colorful day, night, evening, whatever time it is. I hope that you enjoy life and all of its emotions. I hope that you enjoy yourself and all of your ups and downs, and that every day you can celebrate the contrast and the huge range of emotions and experiences more and more. Thank you so much. As I said before, you can always contact me at unconditionalcolors@gmail.com. Any questions, insights, comments, information about what you've experienced in your country, anything's welcome. Thank you so much for tuning in. And I hope that we can speak very soon.